Entire empires vanished, leaving silent cities and forgotten languages in their wake. This was the brutal reality of the Bronze Age collapse, a moment when civilization itself nearly ended. Historian Eric H. Klein describes it as a systems collapse, a catastrophic failure across the board. Today we live in a similarly interconnected world, and the stakes for understanding this ancient disaster could not be higher. By the end of this journey, you will understand the terrifying chain of events that pushed humanity to the brink and see the echoes of that fragility in our own time. Who were the mysterious sea peoples that appeared from the deep, and what caused a 300-year drought to starve mighty kingdoms? The fall of these ancient superpowers holds a stark warning about the delicate balance of our modern world. What do you believe is the greatest threat to our global civilization today? Royal courts from Egypt to Greece exchanged lavish gifts and formal letters, treating each other as distant cousins in a vast, interconnected family. These rulers referred to one another as brother, their correspondence filled with requests for gold, promises of military aid, and even spirited debates over marriage alliances. At the heart of this system were the palace economies, massive bureaucratic machines that controlled everything from the fields of grain to the workshops of artisans. A single royal center could manage the distribution of food, the production of textiles, and the forging of bronze weapons, all recorded on clay tablets by a legion of scribes. This centralized control created immense wealth and stability for centuries. Yet this very strength was also its greatest weakness. The entire glittering network depended on a constant, predictable flow of goods and information. If those vital connections were ever severed, the whole intricate structure could falter, and that is precisely what began to happen. A distant tremor of change was starting to ripple through the Mediterranean, the first sign that this age of kings and palaces was not as secure as it seemed. Suddenly, the horizon filled with strange sails. These were the Sea Peoples, a name pulled directly from crumbling Egyptian records. They swept across the Mediterranean, not as a single nation, but as a terrifying confederation of warriors from the sea. Their origins are a historical mystery that still puzzles experts today. Were they displaced communities from the Aegean, fleeing their own collapsing homelands? Could they have been a mix of groups from Anatolia and beyond, banding together in a desperate search for new lands? We simply do not know for sure. Ancient carvings at the Temple of Medinet Habu show them in distinctive horned helmets, fighting from sleek ships, a visual testament to their formidable presence. Their strategy was one of sheer disruption. They targeted the coastal cities that served as critical hubs for trade, the very arteries that pumped wealth and goods between empires. One by one, these vital ports fell into chaos or were destroyed, severing the lines of communication and commerce that kingdoms relied upon for everything from bronze to luxury items. The Egyptian pharaohs Merneptah and later Ramesses Roman III fought them in great, chaotic battles, and their inscriptions boast of hard-won victories, but these successes came at a devastating cost. The constant military campaigns drained treasuries and stretched royal armies to their absolute limit. The arrival of the Sea Peoples was more than just an invasion. It was a shockwave that destabilized the entire political order. It was the first major crack in a world that had seemed unshakable, forcing these powerful empires to look inward just as other, even greater pressures began to build from within. While the Sea Peoples raided from the coast, a far more insidious enemy was tightening its grip from within. The rains simply stopped falling. Scientific analysis of ancient tree rings reveals a relentless pattern of extreme dryness, a mega-drought that stretched for generations across the heartlands of these mighty empires. This was not a single bad season, but a fundamental shift in the climate itself. The very land that had sustained flourishing cities for centuries was now turning against them. Imagine the slow, creeping dread as year after year, the fields produced less and the storehouses grew emptier. This environmental catastrophe struck directly at the foundation of the entire Bronze Age system. Palace economies were giant machines fueled by grain, their power built on the reliable surplus of agriculture. Without that annual harvest, the entire structure began to falter. How could a king pay his soldiers, feed his scribes, or maintain his authority when the source of all his wealth was literally drying up in the fields? The result was widespread hardship and a desperate search for survival. Communities that had lived in the same valleys for centuries were forced to abandon their homes, becoming migrants in search of food and water. This mass movement of people put even more strain on the remaining stable kingdoms, creating a vicious cycle of resource competition and conflict. The climate did not march with armies or carry weapons, yet it became one of the most powerful forces in dismantling that ancient world. It exposed a fatal vulnerability in civilizations that believed they were permanent, reminding us that even the grandest human achievements are deeply connected to the environment they depend upon. The pressure from outside was nothing compared to the rot from within. When the king's granaries lay empty and his armies were stretched thin, the ancient bargain between ruler and ruled began to dissolve. For generations, the common farmer had given his harvest to the palace, and in return, the palace offered protection from invaders and stability in times of need. That promise was now broken. In the final, desperate letters from the Hittite capital of Hattusa and the port city of Ugarit, we can hear the echoes of this collapse. One official writes of enemy ships already sighted. His plea for help met with only silence from a neighboring king who had no soldiers to spare. This was more than a military failure. It was a complete failure of the system itself. What reason did a potter or a farmer have to remain loyal to a distant authority that could no longer feed his family or keep him safe? The immense social pyramid, with a tiny elite at the top and the vast majority supporting its weight, began to crumble under the strain. It is not difficult to envision artisans abandoning their workshops or entire communities turning away from their failing leaders to seek their own survival. This internal decay was a silent killer. An empire can survive a lost battle, but it cannot survive the loss of its own people's faith. The palaces, once the vibrant hearts of civilization, were becoming hollow shells, their legitimacy vanishing like the rains that once watered their fields. The final thread holding this world together was its intricate web of commerce. Stretching for thousands of miles, a network of trade routes carried not just goods, but the very lifeblood of civilization. From the distant mines of Afghanistan came tin, a metal so vital it was worth its weight in gold. From the island of Cyprus sailed ships laden with copper. Only when these two metals were combined could the Bronze Age create its namesake alloy, the substance of its weapons, its tools, and its economic power. This system was a masterpiece of international cooperation, binding empires in a mutual dependence that ensured prosperity. But a web, no matter how strong, is vulnerable to a single, sharp cut. And that cut came from the sea. As piracy and conflict made the Mediterranean a treacherous place, the merchant ships simply stopped sailing. The sea lanes, once bustling highways of commerce, fell into an eerie silence. Imagine a modern superpower suddenly cut off from its oil supply, its microchips, its steel. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Royal workshops, which had once produced magnificent goods for elite trade, fell quiet. Armories could not forge new swords or spears without the essential imported tin. The economic engine of the palaces sputtered and died. but the loss was more than just material. This constant flow of goods had been accompanied by diplomats, by letters, by cultural exchange. It was the conversation that maintained the peace. With the trade routes severed, that conversation stopped. Kings who once called each other brother now knew nothing of their neighbors' struggles or intentions. The balance of power, carefully maintained for centuries, dissolved into suspicion and isolation. The archaeological record tells this story with heartbreaking clarity. A layer of rich artifacts is followed by a layer of ash, and then nothing. The world did not just become poorer, it became smaller, quieter, and infinitely more fragile, setting the stage for a final, domino-like collapse. This was a cascade of catastrophe, where every crisis fed into the next with terrifying efficiency. The intricate network that had once been the Bronze Age's greatest strength now became its ultimate undoing. Picture a single crack in a dam. That initial fracture, perhaps a failed harvest, puts pressure on the structure. Then another crack appears, a vital trade route is severed. The leaks multiply, migration, piracy, until the entire wall gives way in a single, overwhelming flood. This is what historian Eric Klein calls a systems collapse. The individual kingdoms were not isolated islands. They were deeply interconnected nodes in a vast web. A drought in the central lands of the Hittite Empire did not just mean local hunger. It meant the Hittite king could no longer fulfill his grain shipments to his allies, weakening them in turn. It meant desperate Hittite communities began to move, pushing against the borders of other states already struggling with their own challenges. At the very same moment, pirates could be strangling the sea lanes, cutting off the supply of tin from distant mines. A king might still have a full treasury of gold, but without that essential ingredient, his royal workshops could not produce a single new bronze sword for his army. Each problem was solvable on its own, but together they created an impossible situation. The system had no redundancy, no backup plan for a simultaneous failure on every front. This was a failure of resilience. The very complexity and specialization that had built these magnificent civilizations left them horrifically vulnerable. There was no single moment when the lights went out across the entire Mediterranean. Instead, it was a slow dimming, a chain reaction of falling dominoes where the collapse of one kingdom increased the strain on the next until the entire age simply unraveled. To truly grasp the scale of this unraveling, we must witness the final moments of its greatest empires. The silence from Hattusa is one of history's most profound mysteries. One moment, the Hittite Empire stood as a colossus, a military power that had challenged Egypt itself at the legendary Battle of Kadesh. The next, its heart simply stopped beating. The capital city was not raised in a final, fiery conquest. Instead, it was meticulously emptied and left to the elements. Its massive, imposing gates were left open, swinging in a wind that no longer carried the sounds of a bustling metropolis. The Royal Archives, a library of thousands of clay tablets detailing laws, treaties, and correspondence, were left neatly buried, a time capsule for future archaeologists. What force could compel an entire population to walk away from their homes, their temples, and their very identity? The answer lies in a perfect storm of pressures that left them with no other choice. The relentless Mega-Drought would have hit their Anatolian plateau with particular cruelty, turning fertile plains to dust and emptying the royal granaries that fed the army and the bureaucracy. At the same time, their borders were pressed by various groups, including the Kaskians from the northern hills, taking advantage of the empire's growing weakness. With its army starved and stretched thin, the central authority in Hattusa could no longer protect its outlying towns, let itself. The decision to abandon the capital may not have been an act of panic, but one of grim, collective necessity. When the king could no longer provide food or security, the social contract that held the empire together was utterly void. The disappearance of the Hittites was more than the fall of a kingdom. It was the removal of a crucial pillar holding up the entire international order. Their absence created a power vacuum that sent shockwaves across the region, leaving their former allies and rivals suddenly unbalanced. The world became a much less stable place overnight. Far to the west, the halls of the Mycenaean kings were also consumed by fire. At the great citadels of Mycenae, Pylos, and Turins, the final moments were captured in clay. The very tablets used by scribes to manage the kingdom were baked hard in the infernos that destroyed their palaces, preserving their last frantic messages for 3,000 years. These Linear B records from Pylos are not epic poems or royal decrees. They are the raw data of a civilization in its death throes. One tablet details the posting of watchers along the coast, a desperate early warning system against an enemy approaching from the sea. Another records the allocation of tiny amounts of bronze to metalworkers, a clear sign that resources had become critically scarce. This was a state bracing for an impact it could not avoid. The nature of that final blow remains one of archaeology's great debates. Did the mysterious sea peoples finally reach these Aegean shores, or had decades of hardship and failing trade sparked internal revolts against the ruling elite? The answer is likely a grim combination of both. The destruction was not just widespread, it was total. The intricate bureaucracy that managed everything from textile production to religious offerings vanished in the smoke. The specialized craftspeople, the scribes who could read and write Linear B, the administrators who directed the flow of goods, all disappeared from the historical record. What followed was a profound unraveling. The population of Greece plummeted. The knowledge of writing was lost for centuries, plunging the region into a period we now call the Greek Dark Age. The grand palaces, with their thick walls and storied past, did not fall to a single army. They collapsed from within, their centralized systems unable to cope once the delicate balance of trade, agriculture, and social order was shattered. Their fiery end stands as a stark testament to a brutal truth. In a widespread crisis, the most complex and centralized structures often prove to be the most fragile. Of all the great powers, only Egypt managed to survive, but it was a battered and diminished version of its former self. The inscriptions of Pharaoh Ramesses III at Medinet Habu boast of repelling the sea peoples in great land and sea battles, claiming the countries which came from their isles in the midst of the sea. They were laid hands upon from the beginning. Yet these words, carved in stone for eternity, tell only part of the story. The true cost of survival was hidden in the kingdom's empty treasuries and the quiet discontent of its people. Fighting off such a relentless confederation required a massive, continuous military effort. The state had to pour its wealth into building new warships, equipping armies, and fortifying its long coastline. This financial drain was unsustainable. Soon, the very workers who built the pharaoh's magnificent monuments found their own payments delayed or reduced. We have records from the village of Deir el-Medina, home to the royal tomb builders, detailing what happened next. These skilled artisans, who had always been reliably compensated, did something unprecedented. They laid down their tools and refused to work, staging the first known labor strike in history. They marched to the temples and demanded their rightful grain, shouting, "We are hungry." Their protest was not an act of rebellion against the pharaoh himself, but a desperate signal that the entire economic machine was breaking down. The glory of victory on the battlefield was meaningless if the state could no longer provide for its own people at home. In the years that followed, Egypt was forced to retreat. Its empire in the lands of Canaan, a source of tribute and strategic depth for centuries, was gradually abandoned. The kingdom turned inward, focusing only on its own survival within the Nile Valley. The grand international ambitions of the New Kingdom pharaohs faded into memory, replaced by a smaller, more isolated existence. Egypt's story is one of resilience, but also of irrevocable change. It proves that survival is not the same as emerging unscathed. Even the lone winner in this ancient collapse was profoundly and permanently transformed by the cataclysm, a theme that echoes through the silent cities left behind. That desperate, unsent letter from the king of Ugarit is a cry frozen in time. We can almost feel the heat from the fires and hear the panic in the streets of that once bustling port. His words, "My father, behold, the enemy's ships came," were meant for the king of the Hittites, a plea from one monarch to another in their established network of mutual aid. But that letter never left the city. It was baked into permanence by the very flames that consumed Ugarit, found millennia later amidst the ashes. This single artifact captures the utter breakdown of the entire Bronze Age system. The Hittite king, to whom this cry for help was addressed, did not refuse out of malice or indifference. He almost certainly had no help to send. His own empire was fracturing under the weight of drought and internal strife. His own armies stretched beyond their limits. The safety net of international alliances had simply vanished when it was needed most. Ugarit was a city built on trade, its wealth flowing directly from the sea lanes that connected empires. When those lanes were cut by the very pirates the king describes, its economic lifeblood was severed. It became a target, isolated and vulnerable, its fate sealed not by a single enemy, but by the cascading failure of the world it helped to build. The city was so thoroughly destroyed it was never rebuilt, a silent mound on the coast of Syria that speaks volumes about the totality of this collapse. The story of Ugarit is more than a tragic tale. It is a powerful lesson in interconnected fragility. When every link in the chain is under stress, the entire network can fail with breathtaking speed, leaving even the most prosperous centers utterly alone in their final hour. The evidence of this great unraveling is written in ruins and ash. From the legendary walls of Troy in the northwest to the formidable citadel of Hazor far to the south, a chilling pattern repeats itself. At site after site, archaeologists uncover a single, stark layer known as the destruction horizon. In places like Lachish and Megiddo, this layer is a thick, dark band of burned debris and collapsed masonry, telling a silent story of violent endings. But the most telling detail is not the destruction itself, it is what came after. In so many cases, these bustling urban centers were simply left to the wind. No one returned to clear the rubble or rebuild the grand palaces. For generations, sometimes for centuries, these places remained empty, their names fading into forgotten echoes. Why would communities abandon such strategic and historically important locations? The answer lies in the totality of the collapse. The intricate systems that made urban life possible had not just been damaged, they had been erased. The specialized knowledge required for monumental architecture, for managing complex water supplies, for administering a city's food distribution, was gone. The scribes who kept the records, the engineers who designed the walls, the merchants who organized long-distance trade, all had vanished from the scene. What use was a fortified city if there was no central authority to man its walls, no surplus of grain to feed its population, and no safe trade routes to connect it to a wider world? Life did not stop, but it became radically simpler, smaller, and more local. People retreated from vulnerable urban centers to scattered, self-sufficient villages in the hills. The grand, interconnected world of the Bronze Age gave way to the isolated, rural existence of the early Iron Age. This was not merely a change in political leadership. It was a dramatic regression in the very complexity of human society. The great cities stood as hollow monuments to a lost way of life, marking a descent into a quieter, darker chapter. The world grew quiet. For roughly 300 years, a profound silence fell over the lands once ruled by kings and emperors. This era, stretching from around 1100 to 800 before the Common Era, is not called a dark age by accident. It was a time of forgetting. The sophisticated written languages that had managed empires for centuries simply disappeared from daily life. The intricate script of the Mycenaeans, known as Linear B, was completely lost. The wedge-shaped cuneiform writing of the Near East, used for international treaties and royal decrees, retreated to a few last holdouts before it, too, faded away. When a society loses its ability to read and write, it loses more than just record-keeping. It loses its direct connection to the past, its capacity for complex administration, and the very thread of its own history. Grand architectural projects became a distant memory. The skills needed to construct massive palaces and fortified walls were no longer taught or practiced. Instead, communities built what they could with the materials at hand, creating simpler, localized styles of pottery and art. The vibrant international trade in luxury goods, metals, and ideas dwindled to almost nothing. The world shrank, its horizons pulling inward. What caused this dramatic depopulation and retreat? People abandoned the exposed, resource-hungry cities for smaller, more defensible villages in the hills. Life reorganized itself around survival and local safety, not grand ambition. The great interconnected civilization of the Bronze Age fragmented into countless isolated pieces. The memory of that lost world did not vanish entirely, but it was transformed. Centuries later, the Greek poet Hesiod wrote of a bygone age of heroes, a time of mighty men and grand cities like Thebes and Troy. His stories were not accurate history, but a hazy, mythological echo of the real Mycenaean era, a glittering past now blurred by the long twilight that followed its fall. This cultural amnesia reveals a terrifying truth about the nature of civilization itself. It is not a permanent state, but a delicate achievement. The complex systems that allow for art, writing, and commerce can unravel, leaving behind a quieter, simpler, and far more vulnerable world. The silence of that dark age stands as a powerful reminder of what can be lost when the threads of connection are severed. It is a compelling story to have a single, monstrous villain for the fall of the Bronze Age, a clear enemy we can point to and say, there, that is the reason. But the truth of this collapse is far more complex and far more instructive. Was the chaos solely the work of the Sea Peoples? Their raids were devastating, yes, but many scholars now suggest they were less an invading army and more a wave of displaced people themselves, refugees from other collapsing societies caught in the same downward spiral. To cast them as the sole architects of the end is to mistake a symptom for the disease itself. What about the climate? A 300-year drought is a monumental force, but history is filled with examples of societies enduring terrible dry periods without completely disintegrating. The Hittites and the Egyptians had weathered climate shifts before, so if no single factor was powerful enough on its own, what was the difference? The answer lies in the convergence. The true catastrophe was the simultaneous failure of every pillar that held up their world. Imagine a table supported by 4 strong legs. You can damage one leg, and the table might wobble but remain standing. But what happens when all 4 legs are struck at the exact same moment? The entire structure crashes to the floor. This is the multi-causal model that modern historians embrace. The Sea Peoples were one leg breaking. The Mega-Drought was another. Internal rebellions and failing trade routes were the third and fourth. It was the perfect storm where each crisis amplified the others, creating a feedback loop of collapse that no ancient kingdom was equipped to handle. This perspective is not just an academic detail, it is a vital warning for how we understand history and our own world. Searching for a single cause offers a comforting simplicity, but it blinds us to the intricate web of vulnerabilities that truly lead to failure. By letting go of the need for a simple story, we open our eyes to the subtle and interconnected warning signs that all complex systems, including our own, can emit long before they falter. The proof of this great unraveling is etched into the very earth. At archaeological sites stretching from Greece to the Levant, excavators uncover a single, sobering layer of burned brick and ash, all dating to around 1200 before the Common Era. This destruction horizon is a ghostly timeline of catastrophe, a stark physical record of cities that fell and were never rebuilt. But how do we move from these silent ruins to a full understanding of such a complex historical event? The answer lies in a remarkable convergence of different types of evidence, each one a piece of a giant puzzle. Take the Uluburun shipwreck, a merchant vessel discovered off the coast of Turkey. This sunken time capsule from the late 13th century was carrying an incredible cargo, tin and copper ingots for making bronze, exotic ebony wood from Africa, jars of terebinth resin, and even glass from Mesopotamia. Here was the vibrant, globalized economy of the Bronze Age, frozen at the peak of its operation. Within a generation or two of this ship's final voyage, that entire network of exchange would fall into silence. Further clues come from something as simple as pottery. Before the collapse, distinct ceramic styles were widely traded and even imitated, showing a lively cultural conversation across the sea. Afterward, these styles become localized and simpler, a clear sign that those long-distance connections had been severed. People were no longer sharing ideas or goods with distant neighbors. They were focused on their own immediate survival. And then there is the scientific data, which provides an independent confirmation of the ancient world's distress. Ice cores drilled from glaciers in Greenland contain minuscule bubbles of ancient atmosphere, revealing a period of prolonged dryness. Pollen samples from lake beds across the eastern Mediterranean show a dramatic shift, as tree pollen gives way to pollen from dry, scrubby plants, painting a picture of a landscape turning to dust. When you layer this environmental evidence on top of the burned cities and the silent trade routes, a compelling and sobering picture emerges. The physical evidence does not lie. It tells a unified story of a coordinated downfall across a vast geography, where environmental pressures, economic failure, and social collapse converged into a single, devastating event. The ground itself may have turned against them. Beneath the glittering cities of the Bronze Age lay a network of deep and restless faults. The Eastern Mediterranean is one of the most seismically active regions on Earth, and some researchers, like geophysicist Amos Nur, propose that a perfect storm of earthquakes struck near the end of the 13th century. This was not a single tremor but a cascade of them, rippling along the boundaries between tectonic plates. At key sites like Troy and Mycenae, archaeologists have found evidence that is hard to ignore. Massive walls are toppled in a specific, outward direction, suggesting a force from below rather than an attack from outside. Foundations are shifted, and entire sections of palaces seem to have collapsed upon themselves. An earthquake does not just shatter stone, it shatters the basic infrastructure of a city. A single violent tremor could destroy the intricate systems that brought fresh water within city walls, leaving a besieged population suddenly facing thirst. It could crumble the very fortifications that gave people a sense of security, exposing them to any passing threat. The psychological impact would have been just as devastating. In a world where the gods were believed to control natural forces, What would people think when the earth shook and their temples fell? It would have been seen as a clear sign of divine abandonment, a withdrawal of celestial favor that stripped ruling elites of their legitimacy at the worst possible moment. While a series of quakes alone did not bring down the Bronze Age, they acted as a brutal amplifier of every other crisis. For a kingdom already reeling from drought and failing trade, a major seismic event was the final, breaking blow. It is the ultimate reminder that human civilizations are built not just on economic and political foundations, but on geological ones as well. Our greatest achievements always rest upon a planet that is very much alive. Yet from the silence, a new kind of strength began to stir. While the great empires of the interior crumbled, a handful of coastal cities clung to life, their fortunes forever tied to the sea. The Phoenicians, based in ports like Byblos, Sidon, and Tyre, had witnessed the collapse from the shoreline. They saw the great kingdoms turn inward and the trade routes fall silent, but instead of retreating, they saw an unprecedented opportunity. With the old monopolies broken and the seas now clear of competing imperial navies, they launched their own ships into the void. These were not the warships of the sea peoples, but vessels of commerce and exploration, designed to seek out new sources of wealth and connection. They ventured farther than any Bronze Age merchant had ever dared, weaving a new web of trade that stretched from the Levant to the shores of North Africa, Sicily, Sardinia, and even distant Spain. At places like Cadiz, they established not just trading posts but full-fledged colonies, creating a decentralized maritime empire that thrived on flexibility and long-distance exchange. Their greatest innovation, however, was not a trade good but an idea. Confronted with the cumbersome writing systems of the collapsed empires, the complex cuneiform and hieroglyphs that required years of specialized training, the Phoenicians perfected something radically simple, a fully phonetic alphabet. This system used a small set of symbols to represent consonant sounds, making it incredibly easy to learn and use for practical matters like trade contracts, cargo lists, and personal correspondence. It was a tool for merchants and sailors, not just kings and priests. This revolutionary script did not stay contained for long. As the Phoenicians traded across the Mediterranean, they carried their alphabet with them. The Greeks, emerging from their own dark age, encountered it and adapted it, adding symbols for vowel sounds. This modified alphabet would become the foundation for scripts used across Europe, including the one you are hearing translated into sound right now. The story of the Phoenician Renaissance is a powerful lesson in resilience. It demonstrates that a collapse, while devastating, can shatter old constraints and create space for profound innovation. From the ashes of a top-down, palace-driven world emerged a new model built on networks, adaptability, and a technology that would ultimately democratize knowledge itself. Out of the silence left by fallen empires, new voices began to speak. In the highlands of Canaan, away from the ruined coastal cities, a different kind of society was taking root. The Israelites and Arameans were not building vast palaces with sprawling bureaucracies. Instead, they formed tribal confederations and smaller, more personal kingdoms, their communities organized around kinship and local loyalty. Their stories, preserved in the Hebrew Bible, are filled with the struggles of this new era, tales of judges and chieftains rising to meet constant challenges. This was a life built on resilience and adaptability, a stark contrast to the rigid hierarchies of the past. Meanwhile, on the fertile coastal plain, another group was carving out its own place. The Philistines, often linked to the mysterious sea peoples, established a powerful confederation of 5 main cities: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. They brought with them new technologies and cultural practices, including a distinctive style of pottery and advanced metalworking. Their presence created a dynamic and often tense frontier with the highland tribes, a relationship reflected in the famous biblical account of the Israelite David facing the Philistine giant Goliath. This was not a simple story of invaders versus natives, but a complex process of settlement, interaction, and eventual integration. The old, top-down model of the palace economy had shattered, and in its place arose a world of decentralized power and fierce local identity. This dramatic shift in political organization reveals a profound truth about historical collapse. It is not merely a destructive force, it is a creative one. The end of the Bronze Age superpowers cleared the stage for new actors, with new ideas about community and governance, setting the foundations for the world of the Iron Age that we recognize today. The knowledge lost in the collapse was not just forgotten, it was erased. In Greece, the master builders who understood the precise angles of the corbelled vault and the grand proportions of the Megara Hall simply vanished. No one was left to teach the next generation how to construct these monumental spaces that had once echoed with the footsteps of kings. The intricate palace bureaucracies, those vast administrative machines that tracked every measure of grain and every day of labor, disintegrated into silence. The clay tablets they produced, covered in the cryptic script of Linear B, became unreadable stones within a few generations. Even the vibrant art of true fresco painting, where pigments are applied to wet plaster to create images that become part of the wall itself, became a lost art. The recipe for that specific technique, the precise mix of lime and timing, disappeared for centuries. This was more than a memory lapse, it was a catastrophic drop in the very complexity of society. How do you rebuild a palace when the knowledge of its engineering has evaporated? How do you manage a kingdom's food supply when the system for recording it is gone? The technological regression was a quiet, creeping reality. People still built homes, of course, but they were simpler structures of wood and fieldstone. They still created pottery, but the designs became local and less refined. The specialized crafts that had flourished under the patronage of the palaces, from intricate metalworking to the production of perfumed oils, could no longer be sustained. This loss underscores a humbling truth about civilization itself. Its advances are not a permanent inheritance, they are a delicate construct that requires constant maintenance and transmission. When that chain is broken, the light of knowledge can flicker and go out, leaving a community to start the long, slow process of rediscovery in the gathering dark. The grandest stories we tell often begin with a grain of truth buried deep beneath the layers of time. The epic poems of Homer, the Iliad, and the Odyssey do not present a precise historical record of the Mycenaean era. Yet they shimmer with fragments of a lost world. The boar's tusk helmet worn by the hero Odysseus is not a poet's invention. It is an artifact archaeologists have found in Bronze Age graves. The great city of Troy itself was a real place, a vital hub in that international network of trade. The legendary war may be a composite memory, a dramatic retelling of the kind of conflicts that erupted when that network failed, when kings turned from trading partners into rivals for dwindling resources. The siege of a wealthy city by a coalition from across the sea perfectly captures the atmosphere of that unstable time. Homer was singing of a past already shrouded in the mists of a dark age, transforming the chaos of collapse into a foundational myth of heroes and gods. A similar process of myth-making unfolds in a different tradition. The biblical story of the Exodus, of a people escaping servitude and seeking a promised land, resonates powerfully with the historical realities of the late Bronze Age collapse. With the Egyptian Empire in retreat from Canaan, its grip on the region weakened by internal strife and external pressures, a power vacuum emerged. This was precisely the kind of situation that allowed for new movements, for the settlement of highland areas by groups like the early Israelites. The narrative of plagues striking a powerful kingdom could reflect a cultural memory of the widespread disasters, the epidemics and crop failures that afflicted the ancient world. The story is not a literal history, but a profound theological interpretation of real upheaval, a way for a people to understand their origins and identity through the lens of divine deliverance from a crumbling order. These enduring myths are far more than simple tales. They are the echoes of a collective trauma, the way human societies process and give meaning to catastrophic change. When written records vanish and cities lie in ruins, the oral tradition becomes the keeper of memory. Over generations, facts blend with symbolism, historical events merge with spiritual meaning, and the complex, terrifying unraveling of an age is distilled into the powerful struggles of a handful of characters. The journey of Odysseus navigating a sea of monsters and the journey of the Israelites wandering through a wilderness are both stories about finding a way forward after the world you knew has ended. They show us that even in the face of civilization's greatest failures, the human impulse is not just to survive, but to make sense of the survival, to weave the broken threads of the past into a story that gives purpose to the future. This pattern of systemic disintegration is a recurring theme in human history. The dramatic fall of the Bronze Age kingdoms finds startling parallels in later eras, from the fragmentation of the Western Roman Empire to the sudden silence of the classic Maya cities in the lush Central American rainforests. These were not isolated tragedies, but part of a broader, more unsettling pattern of how complex societies can falter. Scholar Joseph Tainter offers a powerful framework for understanding this phenomenon. He argues that societies solve problems by adding layers of complexity, whether that means creating a larger bureaucracy, building a bigger army, or developing more intricate trade networks. Initially, this brings great rewards, but over time, a law of diminishing returns sets in. The energy and resources required to maintain that ever-growing complexity become immense, and each new layer of administration or defense yields a smaller and smaller benefit. The society becomes a top-heavy structure, incredibly efficient in good times but horrifyingly brittle when a true crisis arrives. When a major stressor finally hits, whether it is a climate shift, a new epidemic, or an invasion, the system has no resilience left. It cannot adapt quickly, it cannot mobilize effectively, and the cost of simply maintaining the status quo becomes impossible to bear. The intricate machine, starved of the energy it needs to function, simply seizes up. Looking at the Bronze Age through this lens, the pieces click into place with chilling clarity. The palace economies were masterpieces of complexity, but they demanded a constant, massive flow of grain, metals, and human labor to sustain themselves. The Mega-Drought and the collapse of trade were the ultimate stressors that broke their financial and logistical backs. We see similar threads in Rome's overextended frontiers and its reliance on imported grain, or in the Maya's intensive agriculture that may have succumbed to prolonged drought. In each case, the societies had become so specialized and interconnected that they lost the local flexibility needed to weather a storm. What comparative collapse teaches us is that the greatest threat may not be the external shock itself, but a society's own accumulated weight and rigidity when that shock finally comes. The vulnerabilities of the ancient world are not locked in the past. They are a mirror reflecting the inherent tensions within any highly complex civilization, including our own. Centuries passed before the first fragile signs of renewal emerged. The world that slowly awakened from the long silence was fundamentally different from the one that had fallen. From the ashes of centralized palace economies rose a new landscape of smaller, more adaptable societies. Along the coast, the Phoenician network of trade colonies flourished, creating a decentralized commercial web rather than a single empire. In the rocky hills of Greece, communities began to cluster into the first city-states, the polis, each one a self-governing entity fiercely proud of its own identity and laws. Further east, in the highlands of the Levant, the kingdoms of Israel and Judah consolidated their power, building a society centered on kinship and shared tradition rather than the command of a distant palace. This new world was less unified and certainly less grand, but it possessed a strength the old order had lost, a resilience born of its very diversity and local focus. The glue that would hold this new age together was not a royal decree, but a revolutionary technology emerging from the forges. Iron, a metal that had been known for centuries but was difficult to work with, finally came into its own. Unlike bronze, which required sourcing tin and copper from distant, often unstable trade routes, iron ore was remarkably common. You could find it in bogs and surface deposits across the Mediterranean world. This availability was transformative. The difficult process of smelting and carburizing iron to create strong, useful steel was a skill that spread slowly from village to village. What did this mean for an ordinary farmer? For the first time, he could own a metal plowshare that was not dependent on the whims of international politics or the palace's monopoly. A sharper, more durable iron tip could turn the soil more deeply, leading to better harvests and greater food security at a local level. This was the true revolution of the Iron Age, the democratization of metal. It shifted power away from centralized authorities who controlled the bronze supply and placed it into the hands of countless individuals and communities. The path to recovery was not a sudden rebirth, but a slow, patient regrowth, like a forest reclaiming land scorched by fire. The new societies that emerged were built on the hard-learned lessons of the collapse, valuing self-sufficiency and flexibility over the brittle grandeur of the past. The age of monolithic superpowers was over, replaced by a vibrant, often chaotic tapestry of smaller states, whose very fragmentation would become the source of their enduring strength. The echoes of that ancient collapse resonate with a startling and urgent clarity in our own time. We have built a world of breathtaking complexity, a global network infinitely more intricate than the Bronze Age trade routes. Our digital systems and supply chains are the modern equivalent of those palace economies, managing the flow of everything from microchips to medicine across the planet. This interconnectedness is our greatest strength, delivering unprecedented prosperity and innovation. Yet, as the ancient kingdoms discovered, a system's greatest strength can also be its most profound weakness. The same connections that bring us goods and information can also transmit financial panic, cyber attacks, and health challenges with terrifying speed. We have felt the tremors in recent years, from the strain on global logistics during a health crisis to the economic ripples from a single blocked shipping lane. The question is not if our systems will be tested, but how they will respond when multiple crises converge. Historians who study these patterns, like Niall Ferguson, point to the same vulnerabilities that brought down Bronze Age empires, an over-reliance on highly specialized networks with little room for error. When one node fails, whether it is a port, a financial hub, or a source of energy, the disruption cascades through the entire web. So how do we inoculate our civilization against this ancient pattern of failure? The lesson is not one of inevitable doom, but a powerful mandate for building resilience. This means creating redundancy in our critical systems, having backup plans for our supply chains, and designing our infrastructure to be flexible and adaptable. It means learning from the past to foster a culture of preparedness rather than one of mere efficiency. The silent ruins of Hattusa and the sunken Uluburun ship are not just relics, they are reminders. They urge us to look at the foundations of our own world and ask if we are building a palace destined to stand, or one that risks becoming a future lesson in fragility for generations yet to come. The ruins of these ancient cities have long held a powerful grip on the artistic soul. Centuries later, romantic painters would gaze upon the broken columns of classical sites, seeing in them not just fallen stone but a profound metaphor for their own time. They captured the crumbling grandeur of empires in their canvases, evoking a deep sense of what they called the sublime, the awe and melancholy inspired by nature reclaiming human ambition. This artistic impulse to explore fallen greatness finds a direct line to the Bronze Age collapse, a real historical event that serves as the ultimate symbol of glory's fleeting nature. In modern literature, this theme is explored with sweeping scope in novels like James Michener's The Source, where the very layers of an archaeological tale become chapters in the long story of human struggle and resilience. The collapse represents a lost golden age, a time of heroes and wonders that slipped into shadow, a narrative that resonates with something fundamental in our shared psyche. Why does this idea of a fallen, more perfect world hold such enduring power? It speaks to our own anxieties about the permanence of our achievements and the cycles of history that seem to lift civilizations up only to lay them low once more. This creative legacy does something remarkable. It transforms dry archaeological dates and lists of kings into a living, breathing part of our cultural imagination. Through art and story, we are not just learning about the past, we are feeling its weight and its echoes. We connect emotionally with those who came before, understanding their triumphs and their failures not as abstract events, but as part of the timeless human story of building, losing, and remembering. This creative reflection ensures the legacy of the Bronze Age collapse is never truly forgotten, continually reminding us of the deep rhythms of rise and fall that shape our world. History is never a closed book, and the final chapters of the Bronze Age are still being written. The identity of the Sea Peoples remains one of antiquity's greatest puzzles, with every new theory adding another layer of intrigue. Were they a unified military force or a collection of climate refugees and displaced peoples banding together for survival? The debate is far from settled. Similarly, the very timeline of the collapse is contested. Did this world unravel in a single, violent generation, or was it a slow burn over a century or more, a gradual dimming where the final flicker of a palace's light was just one step in a long decline? These are not just academic quibbles. The answers shape our entire understanding of how civilizations end. The pace of the collapse matters deeply, as a rapid event suggests a shocking external catastrophe, while a protracted process points to deep internal frailties that were long in the making. Modern science is now our greatest ally in this ancient detective story. Advanced climate modeling allows us to map the drought's severity with astonishing precision, while DNA analysis of remains from burial sites can trace ancient migrations, potentially linking scattered groups to their homelands. Isotope analysis of teeth can reveal where an individual grew up, telling us if a skeleton found in a burned city was a local defender or a distant traveler caught in the chaos. Each technological breakthrough is like turning on a new light in a dark room, illuminating corners of the past we never knew existed. A single shipwreck, a new cache of tablets, or a fresh ice core sample from Greenland has the power to overturn decades of accepted wisdom overnight. This vibrant, ongoing investigation proves that history is not a static collection of facts, but a dynamic conversation between the present and the past. The collapse of the Bronze Age is not a mystery we are solving. but one we are continually rediscovering, ensuring its story will captivate and challenge us for generations to come. The collapse of the Bronze Age stands as a stark monument to the fragility of even the most advanced civilizations. Our journey has taken us through a world shattered by a perfect storm of invasions, climate disaster, and internal decay, a systems collapse that nearly ended civilization itself. The grand palaces and international treaties meant nothing when the rains failed and the ships stopped sailing. This story from the distant past holds up a mirror to our own interconnected world, revealing a pattern that is both ancient and alarmingly modern. The key takeaway is not one of inevitable doom, but a profound lesson in resilience. True strength lies not in the sheer size of our institutions or the complexity of our networks, but in the adaptability of our communities and the diversity of our systems. A society with multiple ways to feed itself, power its cities, and connect with others is a society built to endure shocks. The philosopher George Santayana famously warned that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. This is not a call to live in fear, but a powerful invitation to learn. So we leave you with this question to ponder. What aspects of our modern world do you believe are most vulnerable to a similar cascade of failures? Is it our intricate supply chains, our digital infrastructure, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this deep dive into a world remade has intrigued you, subscribe for more journeys to history's greatest turning points.